Hi, this is Chef Rick Moonen interviewing from my studio in Las Vegas. The name of my podcast is Ocean Raised. Here's where I get to dive deep into storytelling with the original gangsters of cuisine to find out where they started and what drives them. Today, I connect with a deep wealth of knowledge, talent, drive, and maybe most important of all, purpose. Born in the Midwest and raised in the East Coast, Matt Accarrino spent his early years scouring the lower rungs of the Jersey restaurant scene, washing dishes, prepping ingredients, and learning his ropes. Humble work, sure, but Accarrino had his sights set high. That may be why, in addition to attending the Culinary Institute of America, Accarrino earned a BA in hospitality management from Farley Dickinson University. It's certainly why he traveled to Italy to work at Michelin-starred Antonello Colonna back in the United States. Accarrino worked his way through Metrazur, Oceana, and Per Se, where he was recruited to be opening sous chef. A meeting with Tom Colicchio in late 2015 found Accarrino in the heart of craft empire, an influential post which would only eventually take him to the West Coast. Taking the helm at SPQR, Accarrino brought years of technical acumen and respect for product, craft, and heritage that continues to define his cuisine. Amidst the inevitable and adoring national coverage, Accarrino took top honors at San Francisco's Cochon 555, which is a big deal, was named 2010 Star Chef San Francisco Rising Star, and earned Food and Wine's Best New Chef in 2014. His team has earned a Michelin star for SPQR three years in a row, and Accarrino somehow found time to write his book, SPQR, Modern Italian Food and Wine, in 2012. Today, Executive Chef Matthew Accarrino, unique culinary style draws inspiration from his Italian heritage, personal experience, and classical training with some of America's best chefs. In the kitchen, Matthew takes full advantage of the bounty of opportunities California ingredients present. This includes a strong belief in direct sourcing, producing, and at times playing a role in the creation of his ingredients. The result is an intensely personal cuisine that is both technically polished and soulful, and which has garnered praise from publications such as Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, Saveur Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, and San Francisco Magazine. He's been nominated 5 consecutive times for the prestigious James Beard Foundation Award for Best Chef West. Food and Wine magazine named him People's Best Chef California in 2013, and editorially selected him for the prestigious Best New Chef Award in 2014. Matthew co-authored and released his first cookbook published by 10 Speed Press, SPQR, Modern Italian Food and Wine, in October 2012. Outside the kitchen, Matthew's an avid and competitive cyclist, participating in multiple disciplines at the local, regional, and national level. Matt had a dream of becoming a professional cyclist early in his life, until a leg injury turned his passion for cooking into a career. Matthew can also be found working with and cooking for athletes, cycling teams, and his community, connecting people through food and a passion for life. You could say generally that he's got his hands full and legs always moving. Matt, great to have you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and to give us a little background on you. I just have to say one thing. Matt, for people that are listening, worked with me. I don't even want to ever say that you worked for me, because every successful chef has a team behind him. And that team is made up of many different personalities and functionalities. You, always in the kitchen, were the creative force. You were the man behind thinking outside the box. What can be next? I hope that I got to instill into you the idea of connecting with your products and getting you excited about the stories behind those products. But I don't know. I never feel as though I teach anyone anything. I think I learn more than I give in my life. That's the way I felt. And you are certainly the epitome of that feeling, because I always learned from you, Matt. So today, to start things off, tell me where exactly you were born, what you're growing up. What was it like growing up from Matt Accarrino?
Well, thanks for having me. And, I have to say, You were going through my intro, and I was said, "When's he going to mention that we work together?"
It'll come up.
and you made me tired just describing all the stuff that I do. But gosh, you know, I will say, Rick, that working with you, I learned a lot. You know, I think I was extremely young, especially from my vantage point of today. I mean, well, I was in my
I'm old.
I was in my early 20s. I mean, I was in my early 20s, but you know, I was an impetuous, creative, driven young chef, and I guess nothing's changed. I'm all those things still, but you were really just, you know, amongst one of my many mentors. It was really just great about kind of not getting out of the way, but just sort of like, you know, I mean, when you're young, you're a bull and you just run into a wall and you just get out of the way and go, there's the wall. And I would sort of hit it every once in a while, but I would always, you know, be able to turn to you or whoever for advice and kind of come back full circle and reboot and just keep going. And I think that tenacity and that drive is something that's always defined me. You know, you asked where, you know, I was born in St. Louis to a father who drove a faux wood paneled station wagon around with a camera and recorded, you know, the news. I mean, I guess it was a stringer.
Yep.
And sold it to the stations. He eventually, you know, started working for an NBC station in St. Louis. And my parents had met in college at Linwood University in St. Louis, and moved us to New York, New Jersey area, an area we're both very familiar with. And you know, I became one of a budding family that has eventually, you know, encompassed 6 children. My parents, you know, divorced. You know, I think we're all familiar, or a lot of us are familiar with those kind of scenarios. And and it left me going to high school in New Jersey. You know, large as a middle child with a lot of, you know, I could learn from what my older brother got into that he got caught for.
Yeah.
And I could figure out how to not get caught for doing those things. But I also, you know, had a lot of freedom and a lot of ability to, you know, look to find my own path. And cycling was a path that I found at a certain point through a friend's, actually, you know, best friend's father. And it was something where I could channel my energy, I could channel my desire. And that became a big part of my life. And it wasn't until a bone tumor in my right leg caused my right femur to, you know, I lost sort of 7 inches of my right femur, and there was a whole surgery and metal. And this happened in high school. And it kind of took me out of what would ever have really been any kind of cycling career. And I will tell you, I've thought many times, because I've gone on to return to racing and work with a lot of teams and things like that. And it may have been one of the best things that ever happened to me, because cyclists in general, it's a very tough business to have as a living, and a very tough business to make any money at as a career. We see these things, the Tour de France, and that's a very high level. And to think that you could be at that level is difficult. So a chef was a more practical application of my tenacity. And I was, you know, after high school and a stint at college in Pennsylvania, that I really succumbed to life in the kitchen and went to your alma mater, CIA.
Yay. But, you know, so where did you first start cooking? I mean, I was one of 7. I was number 4. So you and I have very close similarities. We're in the middle of a large family, parental, everybody's working. Everybody has their dysfunctionality levels. So at some point in your life, something happens in your mind, or you poke around a little bit, and suddenly you find yourself interested. You know, for me, it was, you know, I was very hyperactive, running around. My mother was scared to death that I'd be disassembling something in the other room, you know, just to figure out what was inside. So she dragged me in the kitchen. That wasn't really the influence, but it intrigued me that there was some science going on here. You know, here, take this chocolate pudding and just take the spoon and just stir this and just don't spill it. Okay. And then all of a sudden it would thicken up before me and I got to taste it. And so that attracted me, but I didn't really, you know, I until later on when I started working in the kitchen and I realized there were so many moving parts that it actually calmed me down. That was when I started to realize that maybe this could be a career for me. What was your moment of realization in your world growing up that you said, this is the path I want to take? Was it an individual, or was it the actual circumstance?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, I had both, incredible grandmothers that were incredible cooks on both sides, and my mother, is an incredible cook, and so I was surrounded by. I can remember us going to Greek restaurants and eating octopus and spanakopita and all these other things that I was in single digit years. So there was a food culture around me, the Italian culture of the Sunday ragouts, and my mother's parents that lived in Oklahoma, and we would go visit them. And when I was training for cycling, I would go to Oklahoma and ride these long miles in the early season, and the best food ever. And international food at that. So, whether it was like a stroganoff or stir fry or whatever these things were, as a kid, I was exposed to all these things. And there was a point where my parents said, and again, going back to this larger family narrative, they said, if you want something, you should get a job and buy it. And I think I was probably 13. And there wasn't, being one of a lot of kids, there's probably not a lot of money in the family at that time and whatever it was. So I said, great, I'm going to go get a job. So I got a job at a bike shop. Was my first job, and all the guys at the bike shop would go out and get lunch every day, and they would go to these delis and things and get food that I more or less hadn't really been aware was there. And so we would go and I would try all these different things, and I think that was an experience for me. And it trended towards, but I wanted to make more money, or I wanted to get a different job, and I got interested in cooking and prep. So I started working at some local pizzerias and restaurants and things like that. And it just sort of evolved from there. And I can remember, certainly when I had my surgery with my leg and I was laid up for a really long time. It was a couple of years where there was some tenuous moments with being bedridden for months, being on crutches for even longer period of time, learning to walk again. I really had nothing else to do besides think about what my next meal was. I mean, I was on homeschool. It was pretty horrendous. And I certainly wasn't out running or riding a bicycle or doing anything. So cooking became an outlet for me that was creative. And I remember watching, Julia's shows, Jock's shows, and really even just Emeril at the beginning, very beginning. I mean, he was terrible on television back then. You could tell him I said so.
He was introverted, actually.
And I actually wrote him a letter. One of my first jobs, kind of in the professional ranks, was I wrote him a letter, and he welcomed me into the kitchen in New Orleans. And I went down there, and I was like, my God, this guy is just like, talk about OG. I mean, just that whole kitchen setup. It was a busy restaurant. There was a lot of stuff going on. Bernard is his chef de cuisine, and all the guys in the back that were native, Creole guys that could cook you under the table. Mr. B back there making hundreds of pies, banana cream pies and whatever it was every day. And I learned so much there. That's always been something I reflected upon, is that when, I wrote Emeril a letter and he answered me and said, come down here. And I went, I was like 17, 18 years old. I went down there and learned so much in that short period of time. And he sent me to Charlie Trotter's kitchen at that time too. And I was able to do some work there, and had no idea that, when he was sending me to Charlie Trotter's, that was the best restaurant in America at the time. I just sort of walked in there blown away. I mean, I'm a guy who didn't even have my own knives at that point, and here I am getting walked into this kitchen because Emeril said so.
Wow.
Which was just nutty. But
what did you do there? What did you do at Trotter's?
Just a long stage. Yeah. I mean, that was really like the moment where you go in there and every single thing was new. I mean, everything I tried was something and especially if you go, Trotter at the time, when you go back and you look, I remember we used to look in those books that he made.
Yeah. I have them all.
And you're just like, oh, we need a seafood dish. And you would just be going through, and it's like, you remember all the fish that, most of us, I never saw a lot of that fish before that moment. And then when I entered into the kitchen at Oceana with you and further into RM, that was when we worked with all that seafood. And then I began, and I really understood it. But at that point, it was something in a book. You'd never seen it, but it was really then, going back into, the tail end of high school and looking at, there was a restaurant called Blue Sky Cafe that was in Montclair, New Jersey, where I was going to high school, and I got a job there part-time. And I can remember the day, and I'll never forget it, because I worked there prep, and they would be open for lunch and then dinner, and lunch was a more casual affair and dinner was something I can, it was a small restaurant, but it was something more serious. And there was a day when the grill cook was sick, and the chef, his name is David, came to me and said, "Gee, the grill cook's sick, right? Do you think you could work the grill tonight?" And I've never worked a station before in my life. And we talk about the magic apron in our business. And that literally was the first time the magic apron was handed to me. And I said, well, I guess I could try, and I'm sure looking back, probably wasn't difficult, but it felt like an enormous thing, an enormous opportunity. But here I was on the line with, there was a guy, Paul, who was a sous chef, and a few other guys that were there. And that was the first moment I was like, wow, I'm line cooking. And that was kind of a big deal. And I think that as young cooks, we have those big deal moments. And I'll never forget that moment, because that was the moment that I was hooked. That was the moment that I never turned back from. And I realized that this is where I want to be. This is what I want to do.
So in your family, that's amazing. As you tell these stories, I plug them into my own experiences, and they're almost identical. As a Le Coq Boss, Charlie Palmer, Frankie Crispo, we were just kids. Nobody knew, nobody had any names. There was no celebrity status. There was just cooks. We were just little servants, doing our thing, trying to make the best of ourselves, hoping to be in a great restaurant and make some good money and enjoy our lives and make people happy. I think that's
that was the best you could hope for back then. I mean, no one had any idea of what we understand today as this, potential. And we all got into it because we wanted to work with our hands and not wear a suit and not sit at a desk.
Right. Exactly. And you can curse, you can do whatever you wanted to, it was a culture is really what it was. We were fortunate in our lives as the original gangsters, as I categorize us, is we got to work in a true culture. There was hazing, there was all the things that you can't do today because you'd be canceled. But the truth of the matter was, it brought us closer together. No matter what, it got harder and harder. That made it even more exclusive because it was hard. If it was hard and anybody could do it, it wasn't as exciting. And you already have that built into you. You're the man on the seat. You're the man in the saddle, pumping your legs, going crazy. You're looking forward and you want to keep going forward. And I got to say, one of the best meals I've ever had in my entire life is when I came to visit you at SBQR in San Francisco. No reservation because I'm a dick. I just walk in and you're like, oh shit, my boss is here. Okay, we got to take care of him. Squeeze him into the bar. I had one of the best meals, progressive meals. You put it together. I said, shh, in your hands. You don't know the sense of pride. Maybe you do. Maybe you do. I'm sure you're at a point in your career now where you have now been mentoring, whether or not you know it, you're mentoring, and you've got teams. I see you on social media. I see and I look at it, I go, yeah, totally makes sense. So you're growing up, there's 6 kids. Sorry, that's me, 7. That's you, the other guy. Anybody else cook? Was there any kind of competition in the household environment? It sounds like you've got a deep-rooted Italian heritage in your mom and father. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's funny because in my family, I have to say, my sister is now in the hospitality business, but on the front of house side. Many years later, my younger sister. Right. But I am the only athletic and the only professional cook of any kind. So I'm the complete outlier. Probably, maybe I'm adopted. I don't know.
I wanted the same thing, but I'm an obvious moon or roll. What are you going to do? So, my brother and I tried to cook when we were younger, because, we were in the kitchen, my parents were away. It was during the day. My mom was working. She wasn't home to make dinner yet. So we tried to make a cake on our own from scratch. It was it was a disaster. We buried it in the backyard. It was so bad. It was completely inedible. I don't know. We might have used salt instead of sugar, something completely stupid. I don't even know where things went wrong, but I just know that it had to be hidden. And I know exactly where it was under the hedges on the right side in my backyard. We dug a hole and we put the cake in there. So, we had sort of a competition amongst ourselves. My brother and I wanted to cook. We turned out having the boys against the girl nights, cooking dinners at my house. Somehow it morphed and evolved into that. And Yeah, I never saw it as a profession. I just saw it as something that was pretty cool, pretty fun. I liked to eat. I was a little big. I was larger when I was younger. I was what they called husky. I like that. I like that name, husky. He's a husky boy. But getting into the connectiveness of it all, because to me, what my career evolved into is, and I didn't see this coming, is actually connecting with our world, being kind of a conduit, the creative conduit to pull ingredients, find great ingredients, and take them, get creative with them, and make people happy with them in an informative way, in a way that's nutritious, good for you, for your health, and that it has a real story, so that it kind of grounds us into our world. Tell me of your evolution through that process as you went through the different multiple kitchens. I mean, you were at many different great restaurants. I know you worked for me, and I'm proud that we had a few years together. I don't know how long because you started at Oceana. You came with me when we opened up RM,
Yeah.
and you and your sidekick there.
Rosso?
Yes, sir. You really took the reins and ran with it. I was dealing with other things at the time, i.e. the owner. He was a challenge, as you remember. And nothing comes easy.
And you know what, though, I will say, because you left Oceana after what, an 8-year or something, 10-year. I mean,
it was a long time to see.
I
94, yeah, 6 years.
Yeah, and it crossed my mind because I'm now at SPQR. It's probably going to be 13 years. I mean, it's bizarre, but I do remember, crossing a threshold, and it reminded me of you because you moved from, really like when you were at Oceana back in that time,
mm-hmm.
For seafood restaurants, for sure, there was Oceana and Le Bernardin, and that was it. I mean, nothing else mattered. But I also remember, I mean, all the times that I had to prep you for the Today Show and for all these appearances you were making. I thought, man, this guy is like the most plugged in. And there, when you go back to like the Moonin lessons, I laugh because I remember somebody called you from the New York Times one day in the kitchen. And that was back when we still had like landline phones, right?
Sure, right. Right there on the left-hand side.
Yeah. And they're asking you about, something. Oh, do you have anything like that on the menu? And it's like, yeah, of course I do. I have this thing. And you just start like rattling something off. And then you hung up the phone, and I thought, we don't have anything like that on the menu. And you turned to me and you said, whenever they call and ask you for something, for a story, right? Always just give them something. Like, so we made whatever that was that you said 10 minutes later or whatever. And the next day, maybe they showed up for a photo shoot or whatever it is, but it's like, just be a part of it, right? So be flexible, be a go-getter. And I remember doing all that, and it was so amazing. But I also remember being in that kitchen, and it was, one of the first times, I think we did a James Beard dinner. There was several Beard events that we did. And it was like, I think the James Beard Foundation was trying to attract a younger audience at the time. And they had this Greens event. Greens was their younger audience. I don't know if that still exists, but they brought everyone to the restaurant. And I remember you were a huge proponent of aquaculture and farmed fish. And at that point, we did something with farmed caviar. And I can remember that dinner, and everyone was like blown away that there was such a thing as a farmed caviar, which now when you go 20 years down the road or whatever, it's
all there is.
It's all there is. Not only is that all there is, but I think that those experiences early on taught me, and maybe it's just in my nature to be inquisitive, where I turned, just because you told me something was true doesn't mean that I'm going to accept it as true. I examine the facts for myself. I've always been that way. And discover whether or not that really is true. So being able to, for instance, taste wild caviar versus farmed caviar and see, what is the difference? What is the difference in the origin? If it comes from Iran or Russia or wherever it may be, is it different than where it comes from somewhere else? And so, but also then it taught me about origin, which is something that led me probably to where I am today in California, and even going from a very early standpoint, working with people like you and Emeril and Charlie and, Alfred Portale and all of these other, legends in the field that taught you about we talk about respect for the ingredient. We talk about, but it's also just understanding, what is this ingredient? How is it made? Where does it come from? What is the potential of something, and examining that opportunity is something that I've always done. And so that was a seeds that were, for me, planted very early in my career by people like you, that have led me to continue to do that over and over again, which is why now today I, for the past 7+ years, make my own line of caviar. And I thought, well, what would distinguish me is, first of all, California is one of the largest producers of white sturgeon caviar in the world. I mean, probably the largest as a geographic area. So it becomes, to my mind, an indigenous ingredient, right? At one point been a wild ingredient. Here now it's basically completely farmed, and for good reason, because sustainably there's no way to put that kind of demand on an ecosystem. So it's a farmed ingredient, but I also go get in the water with the fish, do the biopsies to check the eggs. I'm the one that harvests the fish, i.e. kills it, which is, but it's like, do the work, right? So be part of the process, do the work. So I have, if you're going to get your hands dirty, get your hands dirty. So I go in there and then I pull the eggs and basically put them in a cooler on ice, and you do this in an approved facility. Mm-hmm. The fish is then sold. Right. The eggs go like an organ transplant, on ice in a cooler.
Big skein.
Yeah. To a clean room. I mean, and you're talking about, in some of these fish is 12, 15 pounds, the skein. And then bring it to a clean, certified, inspected room with triple filtered water that's temperature controlled, and you gown up like you're going in to deal with anthrax or something. and then go in there and process because it's like, what is the ingredient? What is caviar made of? Fish eggs and salt. That's it. If there's anything else in it, that's where the problem is.
That's right. That's right.
So, I mean, and that's ultimately what led me to be interested in it, because you could buy caviar from where you thought was really great caviar, and every batch that we make is sent out to a lab to do an analysis on it for, bacteriological information and other things. So you could take something and send it to a lab and find out that there's 5 other ingredients in that caviar that are all the way up to including basically laundry detergent.
That's right. Borax.
Right. So that it will never go bad. Well, that's not something I particularly want to cook with or eat. Mm-hmm. So it led me to develop that line of my own caviar. And it was really through my own inquisitiveness that I wanted to play a role in that ingredient, stand behind what I served, the integrity of what I served, and be able to offer something unique to, my patrons, my customers. And all of that stuff, when I go back to its origin, it all started around the time that I was working for you, and in the beginning of my career, where I was taught by some really influential and important people about what the basics of being a chef were. And that's that culture that you talk about. That's that camaraderie, was that we were something that was set apart from the ordinary. And that's never been diluted for me. It's always been something that's been kind of like my calling to continue that. And so the caviar is a great example of something, where an early experience with you at Oceana and RM continued to play a role even till today for me.
I don't know if you recall, we were at Oceana. I'd become friends with John Rowley. John Rowley was a Pacific Northwest man. He promoted and marketed oysters and the indigenous wines of the Pacific Northwest, and seafood. And he was very much into compost. That was his thing. He actually got married on top of a heap of compost, that beautiful, sweet smelling earth, after it's gone through its process. And through this, he got me through our relationship. He got me interested in buying a refractometer, which tests the sweetness of produce or anything that has juice in it. You can put in this refractometer, hold it up to the light. It tells you how the Brix level, how concentrated the sugars are in it. And I had a little book, and I've got to find it someday, but where I was recording cabbage. You take cabbage, you squeeze a little juice out, you put it on there, and you find out cabbage has sweetness, it's sugar, carrots and everything else, but back then it was new to me. This was like a new toy. And he introduced me to a farm in California that was using compost and picking stone fruits at the point where they were at their ripest. In other words, when you pick a peach off a tree, it stops developing sugar. It'll break down, it'll soften, it'll what we call ripen, but the amount of sugar will never go up. But what it does do is you pick it early, it allows you to transport it and make money. You don't throw things out. Well, Frog Hollow Farm was the name of the farm. Captain Al, I had his number. I'd call him, be on a tractor sometimes. And I was asking him how we could get his peaches to New York. I mean, the only way to do it was by a container. Container was like 24, maybe 30 flats of perfectly ripe, ready to use. You got like 2-day shelf life on these things, peaches. But I wanted these peaches so bad. So, because they were amazing. It was the kind of peach that you take it, you bite into it, and you look at the person, you go, this reminds me of. Your story starts right there. You have, it brings a memory, it brings a story straight out of your mouth. But I'm stuck with, I'm not going to be able to move 30 flats of this stuff. So I had to start making phone calls to Côte Basque, to all the restaurants that I had connections in our neighborhood. And I would go to the airport, pick up all the peaches from the cargo, Delta Cargo, and pack them in my car, bring them back to Oceana, and the different restaurants would buy flats of them so that we could have this quality of peaches. Now, the reason I tell this story is because it's indicative of what we do all the time, and it's not just, I mean, actually peaches. I remember sending you a video when I was in California in Napa. And I went to a farm that had that grew peaches, and I was eating these amazing peaches. And the farmer was like, "Yeah, we grow them from Matt Accarrino." I'm like,
of course, yeah,
full circle, It's
well, I can remember those peaches from Frog Hollow coming into that kitchen, which is interesting because it leads me to by the time I was working for Colicchio, we were getting refrigerator-sized boxes weekly from Santa Monica. And that was, I think Colicchio was post Keller. So even when I worked for Keller, they closed the French Laundry and brought everybody out for us to open per se.
Right.
We would get, we would call up the produce company and get 8 cases of artichokes. And much to the chagrin of the driver, we would pick through the 8 cases and assemble like 1 to 2 and kick everything else back. And they knew we were going to do it and they hated us for it. But everyone who had come from California was used to what that produce looked like. And they would always just say, this is okay, but you should see what we have at the French Laundry. This is okay, but you should see what we have in California. And that planted the seed for me to be bringing that stuff from a gal named Tracy at the time in New York to Craft Steak and Craft and whatever it was. And so when the opportunity came to go out to California for Tom, I knew that was my moment to head out there and get that stuff. And so today, I always laugh because you bring up Frog Hollow, and now in San Francisco, much closer to sort of Frog Hollow, and there's a Whole Foods down the block, or 5 or 6 blocks from where I live. Sure. But I go shopping there, and I walk in, and there's Frog Hollow peaches in a huge pile at the right when you walk into the produce section, and that's like my everyday peach. And I can remember back to where you were driving around to Danielle and La Côte Basque and whatever it was, and dropping off all these peaches, and just so that we could have that hamachi dish with the peach on it. Yep. It's mind blowing. I mean, I'm literally in California, for I guess a lot of reasons, but there's 2 reasons, right? One is that the weather is exceptionally good for my cycling.
Sure.
And the other one is that I literally just basically moved. It's like being at a buffet, right? Like I moved my table as close to the buffet as I possibly can. But I'm literally at where all the ingredients are that I want to cook with. Really. There's cheesemakers. There's all kinds of agriculture here. Caviar, fish. I mean, the one thing that I miss the most out of the East Coast is, and I go back to the times at Oceana and RM was all the great East Coast seafood. Yeah. Which I'm sure, being in Las Vegas, you miss as well, because it just never makes as much sense to put it on a plane as it does to sort of know that it came from right where you are.
Yeah, I source from California, but now aquaculture distribution companies. I mean, the name of my podcast is Ocean Raised,
Yeah. Well, and
food
that's
that is raised in the ocean. And it's been a single subject focus of mine for over 3 decades at this point. And I love the water. As a matter of fact, I just bought a house in Florida, to be honest with you, in North Fort Myers, because I do live in the desert and I miss the water. I gotta be close to it. There's something about just the proximity of it that makes me feel calm, makes me feel happy, makes me feel whole and connected. And so I am definitely much more West Coast sourced as you are, obviously, but you're further west than I am, but not that much. And I'm not running a restaurant anymore. I work for a company that I develop recipes for a company based out of Houston that happens to be a steakhouse for 40 years. But I also do new brands with them, etc. And it keeps me loving life. I don't ever plan to retire. I'm 65 now, so it's that age. But I'm like, I don't feel 65. I'm ready to kick ass anyway. Still, the thing that I enjoy the most is just plain cooking. So, aquaculture. I remember there was a time in my career where I thought aquaculture was bad, and they were doing things poor because it was like a mad rush. There was a big need for it. It was a growing business, and investors saw the opportunity and they took advantage of it. And where do we put a fish farm? We put a fish farm where the fish live, because they already chose it. They can go wherever they want. They can move all over the ocean. They picked this place because it's perfect. Let's put farms in there. And of course, they put a stress on the environment and things weren't done correctly. But today, there are companies that are doing a much, much, much better job. Globally, we're consuming from the ocean, from the waters of the world. Over 50% comes from farming. So it's not going backwards, it's going forwards. How do we do it better? I can get deep into it with you about what's going on in the United States, because we produce very little aquaculture in the United States other than shellfish and clams, oysters, shrimp. Not a lot of shrimp, but certainly not a lot of finfish, so salmon we do. But other than that, not a lot. So companies like Forever Oceans that are now saying, okay, the CEO is very, very, very deep into the environment and sustainability. And the word sustainability has already gotten diluted, just like the word organic got diluted.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
But your definition, or my definition, or excitement about it is when a company wants to give back to the environment more than they're taking out. So they're buying large plots of the ocean, getting permits for, okay, this is ours, we can farm here. They're turning it into a sanctuary, kind of like Monterey Bay Aquarium. That's a sanctuary. You can't go fishing there. So imagine, like, if you could take that perfect environment and work in symbiosis with the input and output of that parcel of our globe, and come out giving it more than you're taking from it. I find that to be amazing. So that's awesome. Great story. You can tell the story all you want, but it's not going to be a success on your menu until you have a product that you as a chef get excited about. We've had our farmed products in our careers, our times together, where they were okay. The hybrid striped bass, nice little fishy, if you cook it right. The barramundi, that was farmed, great. If I'm cooking it or you're cooking it, but put it on the line where you have variabilities in skill levels and timing and everything, and suddenly that fish doesn't do so well, because if you overcook it a little bit, it's screwed. It's not the same. So now you keep going. You got outside of, and you've got fish that are available to you that are bulletproof, like Chilean sea bass. Chilean sea bass, you can't screw that up. I mean, anybody can cook Chilean sea bass. You can overcook it by 20 minutes. It's still delicious as long as you seasoned it, So back to aquaculture, finally we're getting things like, amberjack, hamachi, which to me is one of the most delicious ocean-bearing animals in the world. I like cobia, which is a whole nother story. I'd like to see that farm someday, because you don't see it on the market. You don't see it on menus. Cobia is a word to most people like, I don't know what you're talking about, but it's the veal of the ocean. But they're solitary swimmers. So you can't turn it into a fishery. You don't load up your boat with lots of very expensive gas and go out with a crew that you have to pay and feed and do, and then go after cobia. You just don't, because they're solitary swimmers. So that's a fish to me that I've always been very excited about seeing farmed. So, and Forever Oceans started out with amberjack, and they're still working on naming, the fish. It's going to be called hamachi. At one point it was kahala. It's hard when you're marketing and you want to, say, look, we can't just say we're another amberjack. You can't say we're just another, in a category of fish that are available to people. You want to have them go, why is it that? What is, and is it the brand? Is it the Forever Oceans name? Or is it the story behind it? Or is it the fish? Well, it turns out to me, as I'm learning, it's all of the above. And I want to get you a couple of fish to play with as well, when you get a chance. But talk to me. I just gave you my scenario of aquaculture no freaking way to, holy smokes, really good aquaculture is amazing. And I want to support the players that are doing it well, because the future of aquaculture is just going to get bigger and bigger. And if it's done correctly, I think it is a solution. So I'd like your input on your joyride of aquaculture, how you've dealt with it and what you do with it today.
Yeah, I think that for me, the trajectory has been similar in the sense that, it's something we were all really sort of suspect of at a certain point. And as we've seen good examples and, items well done come through, it's become really, and even just from a cost analysis, sure, but also a consistency analysis, and also then, you can reconcile it with the things that you understand. Like for me being, now a Californian, and I can understand how much the state spends on restocking the wild salmon population with hatched, right? And then they're putting these hatchlings into the San Francisco Bay, for instance, so that they can all swim out into the ocean and then eventually come back and be caught as a quote unquote wild fish, but is it really? And then the amount of money that is spent on that, and the amount that return to these rivers that have been dammed. I mean, you can go through the whole process of this thing and realize that the wild fish as a primary food source is an absolutely untenable. Talk about the definition of unsustainable. That's it. Yeah. So that the farmed fish economy, the farmed fish availability has to be something taken, whether you like it or not. And I always am perplexed, because there are people that still come along and say, you can't eat farmed fish because it's not any good. And you wonder when the last time they were paying attention was, because it would seem like they have tuned out of the conversation for the last maybe 15, 20 years. But the reality is this, when you think about agriculture, and certainly in California, we have plenty of it, land agriculture. I want to grow strawberries in Salinas, California. If I just strip mine the soil like you would the ocean, what will happen is that will become a desert. So even though the amount of strawberries, I mean, if I ride my bicycle, which I do this often, from, let's say, here to Santa Barbara over a couple of days, and you go through that area, the amount of strawberry plants under
plastic mounds.
Yeah, it is literally, I mean, it's mind-boggling. It's for miles and miles and miles. But that soil is being cared for by compost, by augmentation, but that land is in general being cared for so that it can continue to produce strawberries. It can continue, so now transfer that to aquaculture. You think, well, there has to be a sustainable way to have an input into this system that has an output that is relative, so that the inputs don't so greatly exceed the output, which is what we've all looked at with land animals, where this has become a big, the water inputs and the food inputs to land animals, and then the protein that comes out, right? So there's been a lot of effort and research, and people like Forever Oceans, I'm sure, are working to bring that into that 1-to-1 parity, where 1 pound of food in is 1 pound of fish out, right? Yeah. And to get that as close as you possibly can. And that creates a more sustainable, a more ecologically, and a more economically viable food source for a growing population on the planet, which all of this becomes a really, really important concept. And then within that, you have all of the people who are trying to do it really well and create fish that are available to the consumer, that are delicious, that are available, that are sustainable, that do meet all of these needs without impinging upon the natural environment. And so to have someone come and say, wild fish is rotely better, and I can't imagine who it's better for, because it's not better for the consumer. And you're making broad assumptions about the environment that fish is grown in and the level of toxicity in the water and its supply chain of food, that just because it's wild means no one is looking at what that is. Yeah. So how can you say that that's true when clearly a farmed fish has a much more traceable diet, environmental impact, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So right. To me, really, I would say it's a long way of saying that the script has been flipped to where I would say a farmed fish is ultimately probably better these days for all of the above reasons.
Yeah.
And that a wild fish, I almost have to say that in many cases, I shy away from using them because I am considering environmental impact, and I'm also considering provenance. Where does this fish come from? Is it coming from a fishery that I believe that is well protected, or is it in an area where perhaps all of the adjacent territory is largely environmentally unregulated, and therefore how clean is that water really? Mm-hmm. And what are we also doing if it's an unregulated fishery to that environment by I remember the times when swordfish became an absolute, and to this day, I guess maybe to the credit of that campaign, I would say less swordfish is consumed because there was a time when swordfish was an absolute no. Oh, and I have rarely ever used it in my career since that time.
Well, that's where it all started. I've always pushed for diversity. I want people to change up their diet. You can't just eat salmon. You have to have a larger list than 3 when it comes to your favorite seafood. The best answer to me would be all of them. If it's prepared properly, I like everything out of the ocean.
Then the key to sustainability is diversity, right? So.
Exactly. The problem is monocultures, and creating these pockets of monocultures and how that halts the natural process. You can't stop nature. You got to work with nature. And I see that happening more and more in the aquaculture and even hopefully in the agricultural systems, and it has a lot of impact on the human, health. But we know that we need more omegas. We know that we need more from the ocean. And what's changing now is NOAA, our governmental regulatory agency that just takes all the data out of the oceans, just as far as on every level, who's living where, how many are living there, how are they doing, and what's the depth of the ocean, what's the condition of the ocean, what's the pollution, what's this, what's that. They have all this amazing data, and they're coming out with these atlases now that are overlaying the best scenarios for offshore aquaculture. And this is current affairs, right off the coast of LA. There's probably 8, maybe more, proposed areas that are approved by NOAA to be aquaculture, but they're further out. A state has, I think, 3 miles offshore. That's what they regulate them. 3 to a lot, and then 100 miles. That's of government. So the government or NOAA is looking into these things. And I've never been a part of this conversation before until now, that we are speaking of, this isn't going to happen overnight. These aquaculture it's not going to just pop up and the next year you're going to see it on the shelves. It takes a long time, just like a sturgeon takes 7 years at least before you can get the eggs to be ripe, perfect, and harvestable. I just find it an interesting time to be alive, and I'm glad that there's a lot of chefs younger than myself who are embracing and speaking out about it and being involved in the process of making these future decisions for the food systems. We didn't do that before. It was just it was a product that just ended up in our laps as chefs. Boom, here it is. We just did this. You don't know how many years they've been working on it, but here it is now. It's right in front of you.
Yeah.
And you had to deal with the ramifications of how it got there. Now, the discussion is more of how can we be involved with making sure that by the time it ends up on our laps, we're already familiar with it. We've already discussed our concerns, our needs, our wants, our desires, like you said, consistency, pricing, putting it on a menu and knowing that you can keep it on a menu to keep your customers happy, and you have that kind of consistency. We're finally at the point where we can have a much higher level of confidence that we can do that.
Yeah, I think it's being like working at this Michelin level, for me, like, it goes all the way back to the beginning of my career where, what we cared about at Oceana all the way back then, or RM, was quality. That was it. That was the number one marker. And that continues for me to be the number one marker across the board, because if it's not a quality ingredient, if the flavor, those things aren't there, then I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to use, a green peach unless I intend to use a green peach. I'm not going to use a product that I don't intend to use. But the conversation we never had back then was really about sustainability, providence. When it wasn't until you started to introduce those things in that time, they became things that you became aware of and started talking about. And now I think that that has an equal weight. So I could take two ingredients, one tastes as good as the other, and one has a level of sustainability or a level of thought about its impact. And you talk about sustainable, I mean, anything that can continue to happen sort of unabated, right, is sustainable.
Correct.
So there's a lot of things that are sustainable and there's a lot of things that are unsustainable. So you have to really sort of look at that definition and decide. I mean, you could sustainably farm something in a bad way, for a very long period of time. So sure. There's still an ethic behind what it is. And I think that conversation about what our ingredients are, where they come from, how they come to be, has become a much bigger conversation, because there's been a general awakening that has happened over the last several decades among the chef community about what it is, what impact we have. And I think we all, because of going back to those origins, have a great consideration for what those impacts are. And I think that's gone from, it started with seasonality, the notion of seasonality, so we started to say, well, asparagus is great, but maybe I don't need it all the year. Right. Corn is great, but maybe I don't need to eat it all year. And then it became about, where does it come from? Okay, well, maybe I'm not going to bring lobster from Maine every day for my restaurant. If I don't need to. Now, does that mean you can't open up a place that serves lobster rolls in California? Of course you can. But maybe that should be your specialty. Maybe it shouldn't be the thing that's on every menu, because it just doesn't make any sense. So I think it comes down to this bigger notion, which is something that's guided probably my entire life, and I think should guide everyone's life, which is balance. We talk about balance in the mental health aspect of a lot of things, and certainly of being a chef or being career-minded people and human beings. We talk about that now, life balance, right?
Yeah.
So, and then there's this balance about what we pull from the ocean. There's this balance about what we put on our menus. There's this balance of the concept of moderation, a moderative influence on just about everything that you do, is a good concept. I think we've all come to realize that, and that these forms of excess, whether it be excessively eating wild salmon or, excessively doing anything. I mean, even in the course of my cycling, it's all on balance. Nothing.
Well, you need balance if you're cycling.
Yeah.
No, but you're absolutely right. It's about equally wearing it all down and then building it back up at the same time, because if you pummel onto one thing, if we love one species of fish, we're loving it to death.
We've seen it with sea urchin here. I mean, the sea urchin was, there was a dish that we put on the menu at SPQR, maybe 2012 or something was the first time I started to use it. And sea urchin was kind of, I mean, I'm sure it was being eaten in Japanese restaurants perhaps, or whatever, but it was sort of like I could get trays of sea urchin to put into this pasta that was a smoked pasta with bacon and sea urchin and a quail egg on top. And the pasta became so popular that I have a bowl that is glazed to look like a quail egg that it goes in. But sea urchin was relatively inexpensive. It was considered a pest in the ocean, and so it was easy to get. And it's gone from that to, and really, I mean, I don't have that dish anymore. I can't bring myself, because it's so expensive that to run that dish, it would be like a surcharge. It would be, and then for me mentally, it just doesn't make any sense. So we haven't had that dish on the menu in 5 years, maybe 6 years at all. And it makes me sad, and people still come ask for it all the time, which is crazy. But it is a thing, and it is something where that situation got out of balance. And then you could see what happens. And it's created, with one drawing down the one, talk about pummeling something, drawing down the one population of sea urchin allowed another population to rise up, and they ate all the roots of the kelp beds. And now the kelp forests have basically evacuated the coast of California, which has led to a collapse in the abalone population. You want to talk about a case study in basically, balance going sideways.
Right.
I mean, this is a problem. So, and it created the follow-on effects of one thing have created so many other situations environmentally that it's hard to quantify the damage. And so if that doesn't show you that we have to have a bigger thought about what it is that we're doing, I don't know what would.
As a chef, you have a lot on your mind. You have a lot of things to consider. You do. I'm just saying that as a general statement, not just you, not just me, all chefs that are striving to put out great quality, Michelin star level restaurants, which is incredible, Matt. I mean, Michelin star, to people that are listening, you need to understand that it's not just, oh, my food's better than your food. There's so much more that goes on to it. There's a thought behind it. It's the creativity behind it. It's the intrigue, the interest, the sourcing, the handling, and the embrace at the end of it all. In an environment that Michelin also takes into account service, and the way it looks, the bathrooms, the cleanliness of everything that my father told me when we went to a restaurant when we were kids. Bathroom has to be clean. Good, we can eat here. It's okay. Yeah, but there's so much more to it, and it creates anxiety to the individual, to the person at home. They don't want to have to worry about this stuff. It's just enough. Your head can explode. And even this discussion we're having right now is going to be different in 2 years. There's going to be something else. I mean, the lobsters of Maine, not only is there, global warming and they're moving north. So they're Canadian lobsters, not Maine lobsters anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
And even that, NOAA, our little governmental, wonderful regulatory agency, has determined, and rightfully so, that the population of whales has gotten down to a dangerously low level. I mean, whales in the Georges Banks, the Atlantic of the Northeast, there were tons of whales. I mean, that's where whaling started. That's where they got whale oil. There was so much, but now they're down to a population of 300 plus. So, and the whales are getting entangled in lobster trap lines, buoy, line, lobster trap. So stay tuned. Maine lobster, New England doesn't make quick adjustments. They're very traditionalist and very stubborn about it. So we'll see what happens in the future with lobster traps and whale-friendly lobsters. You've heard it here. You're going to hear about whale-friendly lobsters, just like tuna-friendly dolphin. Dolphin-friendly tuna. Excuse me, got it backwards. But it doesn't. What I'm trying to say is the story continues. The impacts evolve. What we're putting in and taking out is incredibly, to me, important for quality and for longevity, availability, consistency, all the things that are the pillars of getting a 3 stars from Michelin, for instance. You can't plant your own of everything. I know you go to farmers and you get the best of that. And where do you create your caviar? Where's your area which this happens?
So the farm is out in Elk Grove. And then I'm able to take it to a facility owned by a company called California Caviar in Sausalito, which is just over the Golden Gate Bridge. And they maintain, so once the caviar is made, they maintain essentially a vault, a refrigerated vault of this caviar that's packed in the original sort of like, 12-pound tin, or sorry, 6-pound tin.
Okay.
And, and then, so when someone orders it, you can order this caviar retail, and they carry it on their website for me, which is nice. So that if somebody wants to get access to my caviar, they're able to go there, order it, and then it's packed to order into the smaller, because caviar does not sit well in these 1-ounce jars. I know we all see it there, but that's not a great way to store caviar. So it's packed there to order and then shipped out. Or if I need it for the restaurant, then I'm able to place my order, and they pack it as I need it and deliver it. And so,
how can people get your caviar? Just out of curiosity.
They can go to CaliforniaCaviar.com, and I'm on there as one of the chefs. And actually, Jacques has some caviar of his own, and I think there might be one or two other people, but I'm probably the only one that makes all my caviar. So I know a lot of them have a relationship to how it happens, but for me, it was an important thing to do, and I think that it's something that's allowed me to feel good about serving caviar, just the same way as chefs. We look at things like truffles. I mean, didn't you have to ask a lot of questions? Like, where's this from? What is this? To understand, and then learn to distinguish the difference between. I mean, I'll never forget going to Italy the first time and going to a facility where they were processing truffles, and there were all these women that were there and all gowned up, and they had the hairnets on and all that stuff, and they're there with these big bins of truffles, and you see them going through. And then they would just, everyone, there's red buckets on the floor, and they were just taking truffles and throwing them in the red buckets every so often. And I said to the woman who was giving me the tour, I said, "What's that?" She goes, "Oh, those are Chinese truffles. Totally different species, but they're all mixed in because they're cheaper. They're less expensive." So people try to sell us all that, and then they mix that in. It's like, okay. So wherever there's value, there's fraud, sadly. So, but these women knew these things on site. And I mean, if you put the two of them next to it at that time, I couldn't really tell the difference. But it's interesting now, because so many years later, with so much contact time with the product, I have a good understanding, and it's really refined whom I trust and where I get some of those kind of products. And so the caviar thing is exactly the same. And it goes down to every single ingredient. And I think when you accept the level of execution that you and I both understand as professional chefs, that we try to aspire to, that it's this level of expertise that you need to develop about what it is that you're doing, and all of the different products, and the general understanding of how to get all those things to a table. I mean, that's what we're sort of acceding to taking on as a responsibility, and it's a big complex thing. But I would imagine so many years later, I mean, it's much like if you ask any kind of professional athlete or something about, what are they thinking about going, what motions they have to do to play the football game. It's like, well, no, I mean, they're thinking about the game overall. So we're thinking about the overall game, but there's a lot of fine detail that goes into what it is that we do every day that just becomes part of who you are. And that's the fabric that weaves us into the chefs that we become.
Matt, I couldn't agree with you more. And you are amongst the giants of our industry. You are certainly one of them. You look terrific, by the way. I mean, you're on your bike every day still.
Keeps me young, yeah. Competition keeps me young. I had a very difficult race the other day.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't fall, did you?
No. I try not to do that.
Well, that's balance. It's about balance in life, and sometimes it's more important than others. I haven't been on my bike in a long time, man. It just kills me. I got to do it. It's the time of year where I just got to get on and start pedaling around. It's tough for me, but I still love what I do. I'm excited about the future of food, even though we have a lot of challenges. The discussion is becoming easier. It's becoming broader. There's more participants in the conversation, and this is something that everybody has to get a copy of. SPQR. This book is awesome, by the way. I mean, I really, truly love it. Not just because I know you. I mean, that's an exciting part of it, because I can hear your voice in it, see your impeccable. I mean, the food is amazing.
But funny story about how that book was written is I wrote a certain amount of the recipes, and then went to the publisher 10-Speed and said, well, I want to write, we're going to do a trip to Italy, and I want to write the rest of the recipes based on the trip. And that made him a little bit uncomfortable at the time, but I said, this is going to happen. So we went to a place called Villa Bucci. There's Impelio Bucci is the winemaker in Marche. And he said, well, I'm going to take you all around town. I want to take you to the pasta maker and the produce market and the butcher. And we went, and everywhere we went, he had to buy something. So we started getting more and more and more stuff. And I said, well, what are you going to do with all this stuff? And clearly I need to make dinner. And so we got back to his estate. There's this huge marble table, and I took everything that we had bought, and I had needed to assess what we had bought. And I laid it all out on the table and started to think, well, what am I going to make here?
Yeah.
And the photographer who was traveling with us, Sarah Remington, was traveling with us for the book, and she shot overhead that ingredients. And that is literally the center of the book, right? So when you open it up, that's the center of the book, is that ingredient shot. And then it goes on to, rabbit a la Villa Bucci, which I made in that moment, right? And then I transcribed the recipe after. And there were a couple other experiences. We went to the lagoon in Grotto and went on a boat with these fishermen, and they pulled up, all these anchovies and shrimp, and they put them into basically a styrofoam cooler box, and it's all shrimp the size of your finger. And these anchovies, and they're all mixed together. And they said, well, we should cook something. I thought, well, how on earth are we going to separate all these little shrimp and anchovies? And on this little island that they had there was kind of like the original man cave. They had a freshwater well, and they put fresh water onto the shrimp and anchovies, and all the anchovies floated and all the shrimp sank. And they skimmed all the anchovies off the top. And I thought, these guys have done this before.
Yeah.
We ended up making, fried anchovies, whole fried little tiny anchovies. And then I made, the shrimp are so small, I cooked them, and I went into their little hut that they had, and they had like a jar of tomatoes, an old packet of breadsticks, a thing of pasta. And I basically made like a shrimp tomato passata that I thickened with, roughed up grissini breadcrumbs and then dressed pasta with. And that recipe is in the book. The picture of it that was shot at the moment, the first time I made it, is in the book. And I was able to, and I thought that was, that was a way to sort of chronicle what, my experience as a chef and my experience as a chef being in Italy and cooking in the Italian style was really about, was the harvesting opportunity. Yeah. And I was so proud to have some of that stuff make it into the book alongside, some more thoughtfully constructed or, premeditated recipes. And so it made that book really special for me to be a part of making.
I own a lot of cookbooks. This is one of my favorites. It's organic. It's real. It's from the heart. It's got soul. And I use that word very carefully. I mean, the thing that differentiates great restaurants from good restaurants is the soul. You can taste it. You can feel it. When you go to Mozza, San Francisco, you go to Nancy Silverton's restaurant, you can taste soul. You can taste the soul in your food. And the person behind it is very carefully considering everything about what they're putting together. But at the end of it, there's a way that it comes together that feels soulful. It's you got comfort food, you got soul food, which is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about food from the soul. And I really would always and will continue to describe you and what you produce as soulful. To me, that's my highest praise to cuisine. Anybody can make something look pretty. Anybody can follow a recipe and it comes out pretty darn good. But there's something that tips the scale when you're eating it, where you just have to pause, like you took that bite out of that peach earlier that I was describing, where it stops you. And you go, I don't even know what it is. There's something about this that's smoother, more comforting, or more whatever it is. Depth of flavor, level of seasoning, preparation, and degree of preparation of cooking. All the things that go into the variables that create cuisine. I find it super, always have, personal, because what you and I do for a living, people put in their mouth. It becomes part of who they are. Every cell in your body is from some sort of nutritive source, be it from the environment or something that you consumed. And so it's a pretty personal profession. And to be able to connect on that level is something that you've accomplished through probably just being you And that's what makes it so incredible, because you're still driven. You will continue to be driven, as I will. I don't plan on retiring. I don't know what that is. I figured the day I wake up and I'm making breakfast, make some eggs, and I drop dead of a heart attack, I win. I won.
And you will have retired.
And I look forward to someday. It's a dream of mine to just ride a bike next to you, not to try to keep up with you as much.
I'm available anytime. Don't you worry.
I was going to wear a jersey. I was going to wear. I thought that's just stupid. wear your podcast shirt, hang out, chit chat. I learned a lot today, Matt. A lot of things I didn't even know about you as you were partnered with me, the way I like to put it, because I feel as though I learned as much from you as you claim you have learned from me. I just love what I do. You do it as well, and we continue to do so. And I was going to make sure that you get some fish sent to you from Forever Oceans. It's beautiful hamachi, and it's got a great story behind it. There's a lot of integrity, and that's what you do. So I want to thank you for your time. I promised you an hour. It's already been over that. I could talk to you for several hours, because you continue. It's funny, I described our relationship, and I haven't spoken to you in quite some time. And now just seeing you and speaking to you has got me reinvigorated, as if I was back at Oceana days. And I thank you for that.
Well, no, great appreciation to be here and to chat with you. And it's always, these are the moments in life when you circle back on some of these things, and do you realize what has become part of the fabric of who you are. It comes from where you've been and what you've done. And so certainly being in the kitchen with you all those years ago has helped shape who I am and how successful I've been. So I thank you for jogging my memory about what that is, and allowing me to tell a little bit of my story to you and your listeners. And it's always great to connect with you, Chef.
Extremely interesting. Thank you, Matt. Have a great day. Talk to you soon, my friend. Hope to see you on a bicycle soon.
Ciao.
Ciao, baby.
foreveroceans.com